Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of What If Naruto Became Tobirama's Heir. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 16. Konoha no Sato. Next morning. Uzumaki Namikaze households. The night was still, moon shone in all its brilliance with a clear sky, letting its rays through the window of our blonde hero's window. The blonde himself wasn't so calm as his surroundings. He squirmed in his sleep, sweating and mumbling. His eyes clenched, his pupils dancing around wildly behind those closed eyelids. Ah! He gave out a short gasp and woke up with a start. He ran a hand through his face and looked at it with hard and heavy breaths. It was wet. He clenched his blanket in a tight fist and threw it aside in frustration. His soft and light footsteps made way downstairs. He walked in the kitchen and pulled out a bottle of water, gulping it down in one go. He threw it in the bin and kept his forehead against the fridge's door with a sigh. Why can't that damn fox let me have a normal sleep for once? He thought in frustration and annoyance. He felt a presence behind him and turned around on instinct when a pair of arms slid around him and wrapped him up in a warm hug. He instantly melted in the embrace and hugged the soft form of his mother back, brushing her crimson locks softly. "Another nightmare?" she whispered, running her fingers through his silky hair, and he said nothing. She cupped his face in her hands to see his eyes covered with red veins in his white regions in those eyes. It was clear he was struggling with sleep for quite a while now. "It's nothing. I wanted to train some before I went to Kakashi sensei's test." He lied and didn't look into her violet eyes. She could tell he was lying. He was a terrible liar. That was one thing not even Tobirama had been able to train him in. He could lie stone-faced to people, but when it came to someone he was close to, his eyes always gave him away. She placed her lips on his cheek and gave him a heartwarming smile. "You're a terrible liar, Naru-chan," she whispered while stroking his whiskers softly. He leaned into her hand and smiled. His forehead was against her shoulder a moment later as she felt how tired he really was. She pulled him along with her and sat him on the couch, taking his hands in hers while her thumbs brushed the back of his hands gently. "You want to talk about it?" she asked warmly, and he looked down in sadness. "It's the fox," he whispered, and she closed her eyes in agony. She cursed her husband in the afterlife for the burden he had put on her son's shoulders at that moment. Both sat in silence. Kushina knew he didn't like talking about his problems to anyone and didn't poke the troubled boy too much. "You want to sleep? Maybe with me you can." She trailed off when he shook his head and her eyes saddened at his refusal. "Ka-chan," he spoke in his soft voice, making her perk up when she looked at his eyes that now held their usual spark in them. "Will you spar with me?" he asked, simply, making her quite shocked. She saw his eyes that looked so pleading and her heart melted instantly. "Why?" she asked, rubbing his hand, and he smiled a little. "I like the rush of battle. It gives me complete focus and helps me to forget," he said, and she smiled and kissed his hands, giving him a nod. "All right, let me go change. Meet me outside, okay?" she asked, and he nodded. He changed into his shinobi clothes himself. He eyed the sword hanging on the wall, within its sheath, and debated whether to pick it up or not. A moment later he plucked it off the wall and strapped it horizontally on his hip and walked out in his black t-shirt and burnt orange pants, not bothering with the jacket. He stepped out into the ground and saw Kushina in a violet battle kimono with the Uzumaki symbol adorned on her obi, her hair tied up in a ponytail. She grinned when her eyes caught sight of the sword on his waist and stood in front of him. She realized it was the first time she was really going to spar with him alone after he had started his training with Tobirama. She joined in on their training sessions every now and then, but never really were they all alone like this. Naruto had the same thoughts running through his head. "Alright, Naru-chan, you can use anything you like. Let's see how strong my adorable blonde has gotten over the years," she chirped happily, making him smile. His hands went behind him into his hip, pouch and took out what looked like 2 kunais. His fingers flicked and 6 three-pronged kunais shone in the moonlight as his Sharingan blazed to life, making the darkness around them quite useless against him. He threw the kunais at her, making the first move, and his eyes widened in shock when she took off and unsheathed her own sword with a crimson almost black blade, which tore through the kunais like butter and headed straight for him. His Sharingan picked up the slight twitch of her muscles in her arms and instantly ducked when her blade whizzed past his hair, and he swiped his leg in a horizontal arc. Just like he had expected, she flipped sideways like a gymnast, and he threw shurikens at her which were again torn apart effortlessly, courtesy of her blade. My Naru-chan, you certainly have your father's speed," she said warmly, making his cheeks turn pink in embarrassment and happiness while he smiled softly. It warmed his heart that she compared the likes of him to his father. Kushina had not really expected him to be quite that fast, granted she was holding back quite a lot, but from what she could tell from his still soft and calm breaths, so was he. And she had to admit, Tobirama had trained his battle instincts and honed his speed quite nicely. He stood up, dusting his clothes, and his Sharingan spun wildly as he smirked and felt his blood starting to get pumped. He loved this, the serenity he felt in the midst of a battle. It was like a drug to him. He was about to pull out a couple of kunais to aid him in taijutsu against his mother when her voice rang through the grounds. "Unsheathe your blade, Naruto. Let me see how much you've grown as a swordsman." He heard and his hand stopped. He brought his left hand back and brushed the hilt of his sword gently as if caressing it. Finally he gripped the handle wrapped up in white silk and pulled it out with a slick motion. Its silver blade let out a slight sparkle as opposed to the dark blade his mother wielded. He raised his hand back a little over his head while pointing downwards to the ground, his legs a little apart for free footwork used in the deadly dance of Kenjutsu. Kushina rose an eyebrow at the strange stance. It had multiple holes from what she could see, and he was completely open from the front with only his bare hand for blocking her strikes. She saw the calmness in his eyes and took her own Uzumaki Kenjutsu stance. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath before he was gone in a blur. Kushina brought her sword up near her face to block the incoming strike and was about to counter it when her blade passed through thin air. "What speed?" she thought in admiration and swiped her sword elegantly to the side, his sword brushing along the ground, while she saw his smile and sparkling eyes showing her how much he was enjoying it. Their blades clashed and created huge sparks while the grounds were filled with the sounds of metal clashing with metal. She blocked Naruto's relentless attacks, effortless, and she had to admit he was quite the swordsman. He had taken after her in this department, she mused, parrying another strike past her ear. She watched as he jumped back and fell down to a knee panting. She smiled, her sword by her side. She was not surprised by this, however. With how fast and relentlessly he had been going on the offense for the past 10 minutes, she knew this was coming. However, "Now let's see how good your defense is, Naru-chan," she chirped happily while he gazed at her with a raised eyebrow, his palm resting on the hilt of his sword for support. His senses tingled and his Sharingan blazed to life as he brought his blade in front of his face hurriedly when a chain erupted from the ground and it screeched, making contact. He backflipped multiple times when the ground started erupting with the infamous adamantine chains his mother was famous for, and he flipped again for a dodge and landed on the bark of a tree, standing on it. He ran up when chains followed him wildly and started jumping from tree to tree for his life, his Sharingan working in overdrive to predict and dodge her attacks while his senses were covering all his blind spots. He saw his mother smiling and standing calmly in the middle with a critical gaze, and he growled. She was merely testing him. He dropped onto a branch, giving him a clear sight of his mother. His left hand parried a chain coming for his throat effortlessly with the sword while his right hand started making seals. Kushina's eyes widened in shock as she saw him make single-handed seals. His chakra control must be through the roof to do that, she thought in shock when he held a half-ram seal in front of his lips and breathed in a huge amount of air. "Fire style, fireball jutsu," he shouted in strain, and let out a humongous fireball where Kushina was standing. Her eyes narrowed at the red, flaming ball coming towards her, and her chains retreated back to her and crisscrossed themselves as a shield in front of her. The flames went around her harmlessly when she felt the cold steel near her throat. "It's over." She heard a whisper near her ear and smiled softly. "Really?" she asked softly, and Naruto pressed the kunai closer for emphasis, though his own eyes widened when she flickered away in a splash of water. A water clone. But when? He thought in shock when he felt arms slid around his waist, and a pair of soft lips pressed on his sensitive whiskers in a gentle kiss. "I'm so proud of you." Kushina spoke softly while she nuzzled her cheek over his. He smiled and sheathed his sword, slumping in defeat. She let out a giggle at his downtrodden expression and turned his gaze to her, placing her finger under his chin. "What? You thought you would be able to beat me so easily? I am the most dangerous kunoichi in this village for a reason, Naru-chan." She spoke softly and he smiled a little sadly. "Yeah, but you weren't even trying, just like the old man." He whispered the last part, but she heard it. His Sharingan went out of life when she pulled him in the house and placed his head on her lap, as both were seated on the couch. She ran her fingers through his hair and saw his eyes close, halfway when he let out a cute yawn and snuggled his face in her stomach. She felt his breathing even out into soft small breaths, and the peaceful expression on his face making her smile and place her lips on his head for a soft kiss. "He's grown so much, even though he didn't show it. I could tell he was holding back. That Kakashi baka is in for a surprise today, that's for sure. At least he has calmed down now," she thought with a giggle, watching his adorable face as he slept on her lap, and she kept caressing his cheeks with her fingers in soft strokes. The sun rose an hour later and she turned her gaze around to see the two sleepy redheads walk out and looked out to see the sun completely out now. "Cass-san, why is Aniki sleeping on your lap in his battle gear?" asked Mito sleepily, and she smiled gazing down at the blonde on her lap. "Naru-chan and I had an early morning spar. He fell asleep after it though, you know your brother," she said with a giggle, and Mito giggled happily herself. "Yeah, he's always lazy, and loves to sleep anywhere. That's my Aniki all right," she chirped happily while Menma went to the dining table without a word. Kushina didn't want them to worry about Naruto and kept his nightmares and reason for the spar to herself. She tapped his cheek lightly, making his eyes squirm as he came to. "Naru-chan, wake up baby," she whispered, and he snuggled his face in her stomach lightly. 5 more minutes," he mumbled sleepily, making her giggle. She looked on amused as she shook his shoulders lightly. "Come on my lazy bear, you have an early test today don't you?" she asked, and he snuggled even further to hide in her warmth and loved sleeping on her soft lap. "It's Kakashi sensei, he's always late," he mumbled, getting another giggle from the redhead. She kissed his cheek and watched his sensitive whiskers twitch when she blew on them softly and nuzzled them with her nose. Finally he let out a cute yawn and his baby blue eyes gazed into the amused violet ones, and he smiled lazily. It was a really comforting nap and he felt himself quite refreshed now. He hugged Kushina suddenly, as if his life depended on it, and she hugged him back worriedly. "Arigato," he whispered, and she smiled, her worries washing away instantly. "It's all right, now go for a shower and have breakfast before you leave," she said, caressing his cheek gently, and he nodded, giving her a peck on her cheek, and walked back to his room upstairs while Kushina put her sword back in her room and went to prepare some breakfast. She chopped through onions quickly when she felt something poking her hip softly and looked down at the brown eyes of the adorable bear who was purring softly. She rubbed his ears and patted his head, making the bear nuzzle itself around her, and she giggled. All right, you adorable over smart bear. You got me this time too, here you go," she said, putting some slices of boiled chicken for her in a bowl, and the bear ate happily while wagging its short tail in happiness. She let out a giggle when the bear hopped out and submerged in the lake to cool down, making her laugh as she watched her sleep nose deep in the water. Naruto sat at the dining table with Mito chatting away about her sensei, someone named Yamato, and he listened on her excited squeals as she imagined her future missions. He ate quickly, seeing the time, and picked his jacket up. He kissed Mito's head and gave a peck on Kushina's cheek, making them both smile happily. He ruffled Menma's hair, who looked on annoyed as his brother treated him like a child, and the ever-calm smile on his face and focused on his breakfast, though couldn't help the small smile that graced his lips at the small gesture from his elder brother. Training Ground 7. Naruto walked in the training ground. Kakashi had called them to 15 minutes late, and just as he thought, Hinata was already there. She was the reason he came this early. She could never be willingly late for anything, no matter what he said, and made his way to the adorable girl stealthily, who was reading a taijutsu scroll from her clan under the shade of a tree. Hinata kept on reading, completely engrossed in the scroll, when she felt a weight on her lap and pulled the scroll up a bit to see a pair of azure eyes watching her. She blinked innocently and the eyes blinked back at her. Kya! She yelped in shock and fumbled with the scroll in her hands. Naruto's soft chuckles rang throughout the clearing while she rolled her scroll neatly. She hid her cheeks with her hands, which were crimson in embarrassment at her reaction to his presence, and the way he watched her adoringly on her lap. "Oh hey, oh Hin." He spoke softly, not wanting to startle her anymore, and she nodded back with a soft squeak. He smiled in amusement, making her look elsewhere in embarrassment, when he took advantage and kissed her soft cheek. She turned a new shade of pink, and he smiled when she just ran her fingers through his hair and didn't meet his eyes. He closed his eyes and loved the softness of her lap and the way her fingers softly traced his scalp. His breathing softened and he went for a nap from the comfort of the soft breeze in the fields. He still didn't like why his mother had woken him up, and this was just great. Sasuke came and saw the scene in front of him, with Naruto having slept on the poor girl's lap, who was blushing madly at being seen like this. He sighed and jumped on the branch over them, seeing they still probably had another hour before their tardy new sensei came along. "Relax, Hinata, I won't tease or say anything about this." He spoke blankly to the embarrassed girl, who nodded meekly and sat there looking at the blonde on her lap lovingly. He looked so cute in her eyes sleeping like that. She cradled his head in a childlike manner while he snuggled in her arms. She could hold him like that forever, she mused, and smiled softly with a faint pink blush. They sat there for an hour, while Sasuke, unknown to Hinata, had taken a small nap for making up to waking up so early himself. He always trained early in the morning and hadn't missed today either. This was the scene Kakashi saw as he crouched down on the tree's branch himself. "Yo!" he chirped, waving his hand lazily, and 3 pairs of eyes watched him in different ways. Hinata had a bright smile at seeing her sensei, which made him smile himself. Naruto just yawned while Sasuke watched him with narrowed eyes. "You're late," he said in an annoyed tone, making the jounin rub his neck sheepishly. "Mama, Sasuke, you see, an old lady needed help with her bags and then she forgot her address." He started but was cut off by the annoyed Uchiha. "Whatever," he mumbled tiredly, making the jounin sweat drop. Those excuses took precious time and effort to come up with. No one appreciated the work he put in them, he mused sadly. The jounin jumped down, walking into the middle of the clearing, followed by his 3 cute charges, and pulled out a clock from the small bag in his hands. He set it onto a stump, and I smiled at the 3 curious yet confused genin perspectives in front of him. "All right." He clapped happily, getting their attention towards him, and took out a couple of bells from his hip pouch. "We are going to do a survival exercise," he said, and sweat dropped as no reaction came from them, just innocent stares. "What are the bells for?" asked Naruto, and the man-eye smiled at the blonde's question. "These are your objective. You have to retrieve these bells from me through any means necessary, which means come at me with the intention to kill." He chirped happily when he saw the shy Kunoichi raise her hand a little for a question. He nodded, motioning for her to go on. "Oh no, Sensei, there's only 2 bells," she said softly, and he nodded, giving her another infamous eye smile. "That is correct, Hinata, which means only 2 of you at maximum will pass this exercise and become genins this fine morning," he said, making all of their hearts skip a beat when his words rang through the clearing. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man and spoke up. "Konoha has always worked in 4-man cells, you're lying, Sensei," he said, surprising the 2 by his side, who turned their eyes to their calm sensei. Kakashi couldn't help but be impressed by the blonde's inquisitiveness. He's a sharp one. He mused and waved his hand lazily. There have been many exceptions over the years, Naruto. Even two-man cells have functioned if they were oiled well enough. You don't need to worry about that. The only thing you need to worry about are ease, he said, pointing to the jingling bells in his hands which he tied to his belt. The three glanced at each other and then back at Kakashi while he felt the atmosphere amongst the three getting tenser by the second. All right, you have until noon to get them. Your time starts, he said, and watched as they crouched down, and he tapped the clock on the stump. Now, he shouted, and the three were off in the trees, and he took out his book to see who it would be that tried to attack him first. The three ran through the trees and dropped by the shore of the river. Hinata fiddled with her kimono's helm nervously, biting her lip. What are we going to do, Naru? She asked softly, and he sighed as he sat on the boulder. His hand ran through his hair in frustration while he thought of something to rack them out of this mess. What else is there to do? The two of us who are most worthy take the bells by force and pass this stupid test. Sasuke muttered in irritation and froze at the glare that Naruto sent his way. And what about the third one? He asked in a low voice, but Sasuke could sense his dangerous intent lying underneath. Sacrifices have to be made to walk forward. The weak deserve to be left behind and not carried as a burden by the strong, slowing them down too, he muttered, and Naruto's glare intensified. You would abandon one of us just to pass this test? He asked, and Sasuke merely shrugged. I will pass this test one way or another, so what do you say, Naruto? Let's team up and take them for ourselves. You know as well as I do the two of us will be unstoppable together, he asked, raising his hand forward for a truce. Hinata's shy eyes glanced back and forth between the two boys, and she chewed her lip as she watched Naruto raise his hand too. Slap. Sasuke rubbed his red hand that Naruto had slapped away, and glared at him, who glared right back. You think I would abandon her just to pass this test and move forward? He asked coldly, making Sasuke smirk. You're letting your feelings for her get the better of you, Namikaze. Just think we could get the bells. He was cut off by the icy voice of Naruto. I'd rather go back to the academy than abandoning Hinata alone, he said, trashing the idea of the three of them working together when he saw the greed and hunger in Sasuke's eyes and knew he wouldn't agree for it. Whatever, I'd get the bell myself. See for yourselves, as she will still be left behind, he said, and jumped back in the trees. Hinata knew those two were stronger than her and had much more diverse techniques. She was heavily reliant on her Juken, and she would most probably be the one left behind. Her eyes prickled with tears at their corners when she was pulled gently in a warm hug. She sniffled softly as Naruto kissed her eyes off their tears and gazed into her eyes with his own fiery azure ones. Don't worry, Hen. We'll get a bell and go ahead together, I promise. I am not leaving you behind no matter what, he said softly, and she nodded with a soft smile. He never broke his promises, and she was glad he was with her as she hugged him back with happily. But what about Sasuke? She asked in a sniffle, and he smiled, petting her ponytail softly. We'll get him too somehow. He is on a high horse right now. Let's just focus on doing our best, all right? I'll figure something out, he said, and she smiled, wiping her face with her sleeves. He jumped ahead and she followed him as he started to work on a plan to trap the Jounin in. Sasuke sat on a tree while he watched the calmly reading Jounin. He took out 3 kunes in his left hand and shurikens in his left. This is it, he thought, and threw the kunes one after the other, while Kakashi merely jumped back a little with each one. He launched the shurikens which swung at the Jounin, while he merely sidestepped with a small jump. His lone eye widened in surprise when he saw another kunai land in front of him and cut a hidden wire. A trap, he thought in surprise, and dodged a hail of kunes from his side and tripped another wire, making a hail of shurikens launch from his left. Impressive, he thought, and the shurikens made contact. Sasuke smirked from his hidden point but let out a growl when a moment later a log fell in place of Kakashi and jumped out in the middle of the clearing. You really are a brave one, I'll give you that, Sasuke. Kakashi spoke non-chalcedony, leaning on a tree behind the Uchiha and flipped a page on his book. I'm getting a bell no matter what. I won't stop until my goals are fulfilled. He spoke blankly and Kakashi let out a perverse giggle and flipped another page. Say that after you've gotten a bell, Sasu-chan. He goaded the boy on and Sasuke growled. He jumped back and rushed the Jounin, engaging him in taijutsu. He jumped up and pushed his heel for the Jounins, who blocked it with his arm. Sasuke brought his left leg on the other and Kakashi brought up his other hand and caught both feet deftly with a slight wince. The boy has some strength, I'll give him that. He mused and his leg came up to block the boy's fist while he watched the small smirk that graced his lips. I've got you now, he thought and swiped his free hand that held a kunai at his belt and Kakashi's lone eye widened. He rushed back but the kunai made contact with Bell, slightly letting the jingling of its metal run across the clearing. Kakashi slid back and put his book back in pouch, narrowing his eyes at the scowling Uchiha. He's fierce. He mused and stood up, dusting off his clothes lazily. Looks like I won't be reading my back today, he muttered glumly, making Sasuke frown. You better take me seriously then, he shouted, making Kakashi raise an eyebrow. You give yourself too much credit. Just because you're different doesn't always mean you're better, he said wisely and saw the raven growl menacingly. He went through hand seals immediately and took a deep breath, ending at Tiger Fire style, Dragon Flame Jutsu, he exclaimed and Kakashi's eye widened in shock, clearly not expecting a jutsu of that magnitude from the boy. The narrow stream of flames made its way towards Kakashi and tore apart the tree behind him that fell when a hole was bored through its center. Sasuke smirked, panting heavily at the chakra drain when a couple of hands caught his ankles, making his eyes turn wide. Ah! He gasped when they pulled him down, and he was buried neck deep in the ground. He watched Kakashi pull out in front of him and dusting his clothes off as if nothing had happened at all. Shinobi Battle Skill Number 2, Ninjutsu. That was Earth Style, Headhunter Jutsu, he said happily, making the Uchiha throw him a death glare. You know what they say, the nail that sticks out gets hammered in first. In this case it was quite literal, get it? He asked playfully with a chuckle and laughed lightly at the murderous aura surrounding the boy. He ignored the raven and walked out, leaving a fuming Uchiha behind. Naruto and Hinata sat in the trees, having watched Sasuke's display of skills and Kakashi's easy win quite closely. You ready, Hin? He asked, and the girl nodded meekly, still quite nervous seeing how Sasuke had been obliterated so easily. She felt a pair of lips press on her lips and felt Naruto stroking her soft cheek tenderly. It'll be all right, don't get nervous, okay? He asked, and she nodded, the confidence in her eyes shining brilliantly now. He smiled and jumped down, starting his plan. He walked in the middle of the clearing where they had started to see Kakashi, there reading his infamous orange book. He looked up to see the blonde coming in calmly and rose an eyebrow. You've come alone, Naruto? Sure have gotten confident, all grown up I guess, huh? He asked playfully, and the blonde said nothing. Kakashi snapped his book shut to see the potential the blonde held, and seeing the disciple of Tobirama Senju in action for himself. Naruto breathed a long breath and started taking off his jacket, making the Jounin stiffen. Naruto motioned to put his jacket on the stump and the Jounin nodded, waiting for some plan when he saw the blonde stand in front of him and loosen up his arms. Shall we get started? Naruto asked, and the Jounin nodded with an eye smile. Naruto caressed his sword's hilt and unsheathed it in a slick motion. Kakashi eyed the sparkling silver blade with cautious eyes, seeing how well cared it looked to be. His father being the White Fang himself, he knew a lot about the deadly art of kenjutsu. And the sword always showed how true a swordsman was to the art. Naruto disappeared in a blur, his Sharingan blazing to life instantly. Kakashi's eye widened in shock and his jaw dropped at the amazing speed the blonde possessed and ducked down the swipe that whizzed past his head from behind. He chucked out a kunai and turned around to see the blonde already gone from view and blocked a swipe to his neck on honed instincts alone. He decided to take it seriously lest get cleaved in half by an academy student, and parried the blade aimed for his waist to the side. He swiped his kunai for the blonde's arms and smiled beneath his mask to see the blonde's eyes, making no effort at dodging. His eyes widened when he saw it sail millimeters past the intended target and jumped back from a swipe aimed for his stomach. He blocked a vertical slash with his two kunais in a crossguard over his head and swiped his left one to the blonde's stomach to see him miss again by only a small hair length. He saw the small smirk on the blonde's face as if taunting him and narrowed his eyes on the boy. What the hell is going on here? He thought when the blonde charged at him headstrong, and for the life of him Kakashi couldn't believe how he was being pushed back on the defense. He threw the useless kunais that had taken numerous hits to the side and chucked out new ones to raise them in a crossguard yet again. The metal clashed with metal and sparks, and Kakashi had to admit he hadn't had such a good straight fight with any genin in years. He swiped them in a cross arc, yet again missing by a hair's length, and growled. This is getting annoying, he thought in irritation when he saw the blonde back flip and land gracefully, while his breathing was heavy and sweat glistened his face, but his eyes sparkled in happiness at the great fight he was fighting. Naruto's eyes traveled into the trees for a moment when he saw a glimpse of those lavender pearls and turned his eyes back to the jounin, sheathing his blade. Giving up already, Naruto? I was beginning to have some fun, Kakashi said lazily, though hadn't meant it inwardly. The blonde was pushing him to high chunin speeds already, and he cursed himself for slacking off on training after retiring from the Black Ops. I really have to get myself back together. This is embarrassing. To be pushed by someone who isn't even a genin? Should I use my... He thought, bringing his hand up to his forehead protector, and noticed Naruto stiffen and instantly put his hands in a cross-hand seal. Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu, he exclaimed, and formed 10 clones that started covering him. Kakashi rose an eyebrow at the panting blonde who was exerting himself heavily in this fight now. You're getting sloppy, Naruto. Wasting chakra on clones to increase your numbers won't be enough. I've had experience in a war to go against multiple foes at once. This jutsu won't help you, merely lead to your downfall. He admonished, but was on his guard as he saw the blonde, ever calm without a hint of hesitation in his actions, as if he was in complete control of the battle. Just like sensei, he thought in nostalgia, and ducked down under a clone's roundhouse kick and caught a punch from another by his side. He pushed them a bit and slid back to block fists from the other two and watched the rest cover him from behind. His eye roamed around and narrowed as they were closing in on him slowly with their coordinated movements, as if it was what he had planned. What is his next move? Is he planning to pile up on me with clones? He thought, and much to his surprise all 10 of them rushed at him, and he glanced at the original, who stood back with his smirk widening slightly. Naruto brought his left hand to his chest in a half-rem hand seal, and Kakashi's eye widened in horror as he saw all the clones glow unnaturally. Oh shit! Boom! The entire clearing felt the shock wave from the explosion as a smoke cloud rose above the tree cover. Hinata went through hand seals as soon as the clones started glowing and veins popped around her eyes. Byakugan, she whispered and focused all around her, holding her hand in a half-rem hand seal, and smiled as she let out a pulse of chakra. Kakashi, who had just narrowly substituted from those deadly clones, stood on a branch when his eyes caught the glowing seals over the tag on the bark of the tree by his side. Oh shit! Boom! He substituted another time and stood on a tree to see another tag slapped near his feet, and sweat dropped. Hinata was tracking his movements with her Byakugan and activating the tags as soon as she saw him land near one. This had been Naruto's plan, to distract him long enough while she set up the trap and boxed him in the perfect position before they went all out. She let out another pulse of chakra as soon as her eyes caught sight of Kakashi's substitution. Boom! 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 The clearing was racked with a series of perfectly executed explosions, while the jounin in question who was targeted could do nothing but substitute for his life. He didn't understand how the hell these kids had come across so many exploding tags, but he would be having a word with their chosen weapons shop after this. Finally, he landed in the middle of the clearing to see the panting blonde standing there with his sword sheathed but two three-pronged kunais in his hands. He raised his forehead protector and Naruto dropped into his stance, seeing his sensei was getting serious when Kakashi sidestepped as a palm strike passed harmlessly by his side. Hinata went on the charge and swiped a kick for his chest that he slapped away and glanced the palm for his stomach to the side effortlessly. Her eyes widened at seeing her Juken being countered so easily, and she stumbled when he let her hand overreach its intended target. He poked her neck with his two fingers gently, and let out a pulse of lightning chakra, making her Byakugan deactivate and eyes roll back. She fell unconscious in a soft heap while he ducked under the swipe of a kunai and blocked the kick that followed easily with his right hand. His Sharingan glared menacingly at Naruto, who glared right back without a flinch. For Kakashi, the force behind his kick was nothing compared to Gaze, and much to Naruto's shock, he pulled him towards him by his feet and Naruto slipped and fell down on his back with a gasp of pain. He saw Kakashi stand over him with his mismatched eyes watching, his downed form blankly. "You did well, Naruto, better than I had expected. Now stay down," he stated compellingly, and Naruto started making seals with his left hand. Kakashi stomped on his wrist with a foot and Naruto screamed in agony as he applied pressure over it. "Give up," he spoke in a commanding voice as he saw Naruto grit his teeth in pain and think of some way to win. Kakashi saw him racking his mind and sighed inwardly. The boy was too damn stubborn like his mother to give up, and did the same to him as he did to Hinata, and knocked him out. Kakashi let out a soft sigh and pulled down his headband, smiling beneath his mask in pride. "The boy is something else, to push me this far," he thought proudly, and picked him up over his shoulder, and Hinata tucked under his arm. He placed the two by the stumps and took out Sasuke and tied him to the stump with a rope, who struggled to no avail. Half an hour later the bell rung and Naruto and Hinata came to consciousness. Naruto winced and rubbed his sore wrist, which Hinata noticed immediately and gasped. "Oh Kami, you're hurt," she gushed and took his wrist in her hands gently, ignoring the amused Kakashi and Sasuke by her side completely. Naruto watched with a warm gaze while she applied some ointment over it and started wrapping it up in bandages. "You all right, Hin?" he asked softly, and she nodded with a soft smile. "Hi," she squeaked in embarrassment at his loving gaze and focused on the bandages. Kakashi coughed when she finished, making them look at him sheepishly, and I smiled. He chucked a kunai at Sasuke and cut through the ropes instantly. Said boy rubbed his arms at being free and grunted in annoyance at being tied so tightly. Tink tink. The sound of jingles rang through the clearing while Sasuke and Naruto gazed at the bells in their hands that Kakashi had thrown at them, and then back at their sensei, who was smiling at them. "What's this, sensei? We failed, didn't we?" Naruto asked while Sasuke stared curiously too. Kakashi shook his head slowly, confusing them. "The test was never for the bells, Naruto," he said, confusing them, and continued on. "It was to test your skills and see if you three were worthy to be genin," he explained, and then nodded slowly. Naruto looked at the scared face of Hinata, and his heart clenched at the sight of her quivering lip. "Why not Hinata?" he asked softly, making Kakashi sigh. "Let's see what you all will do now," he thought, looking at the three calculatively. "She didn't have what it takes to impress me like you and Sasuke did. That is all there is to it. I'm afraid she'll go back to the academy," he explained, and Hinata clenched her eyes shut, making her unshed tears roll down her cheeks, and Naruto clenched the bell in his hand at the sight of her tears. Tink. Kakashi looked at the bell in his hand and then back at the blonde who had thrown it to see him embrace the crying girl in his arm, pulling her onto his lap. He tucked her head under his chin and glared at the confused Kakashi defiantly. "If Hinata's going back to the academy, then so am I. She deserves this as much as we do. I promised her we would go forward together, and I never go back on my word, for that is my ninja way," he said confidently, making Kakashi's heart skip a beat at the confidence in his eyes. Sasuke looked at the bell in his hand and clenched his fist and jaw. "I'm so damn stupid," he thought in annoyance. Tink. Kakashi looked at the second bell in his hands and then back at Sasuke, who was looking to the other side with a scowl. Don't look too much into it. I want a worthy teammate with me, and these two are the best there is who won't hold me back. I'll train for another year and get closer to my goals, and I'll be damned if I let Namikaze have a whole year for training while I am on some missions. He muttered in annoyance, making Kakashi shocked to the core. He hadn't expected Sasuke to throw away a chance at gaining strength for anyone else's sake in years. Naruto caught him under a headlock and pulled him in with a chuckle. "Ah, you just can't be upfront about your feelings, can you, big bad Uchiha? You're too soft and don't want to leave poor old me alone," he teased in a cooing voice. Hinata giggled, wiping her tears, watching Sasuke try to wriggle out and yell curses at the blonde who was laughing wholeheartedly. Kakashi raised his forehead protector with softened eyes and watched the three's interaction with warmth in his heart. "Are you seeing this, Obito, Rin, Minato sensei? Finally, I can move on," he thought, pulling down his headband and coughed to gain the attention of the three. Sasuke was on top of Naruto ready to punch his lights out while Hinata tried to stop the two, and Naruto was chuckling happily. "Is that your final decision then?" he asked, and watched them sit up and nod with hardened eyes, and he glared at them intimidatingly to see them fiddle a bit, and I smiled. "Then you all pass," he said happily, getting lost looks from the three. "Huh?" the three said intelligently in unison, and he chuckled with a nod. "You pass. The test was to see if you were willing to put your comrades over your own preferences. Each of the previous teams I tested stuck to the rules and abandoned their comrades," he said, walking to the memorial stone with a sad gaze. "The names of my best friends are engraved on this stone. Remember your first and most important lesson from your sensei. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum. That's true, however, those who abandon even one of their comrades are worse than scum," he said, getting looks of admiration from the three, who nodded. "Alright then, Team 7 is now official. Meet me at the same place we met for team introductions tomorrow at 9. He was cut off by Naruto. "You mean 11? He asked lazily, and Kakashi I smiled and waved his hand. "Johnny," he said, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto and Hinata stood up along with Sasuke, who tried to go off on his own, but was again in a headlock, courtesy of Naruto. "Oh no you don't, let's go and have lunch together," he said, pulling the Uchiha by the collar, who was yelling curses at the blonde, while Hinata ran up to catch up to the two, giggling happily at her new teammates' interactions. Chapter 17. Konoha no Sato. Uzumaki Namikaze households. The usually chirpy and full of life residence to the family of our blonde hero was unusually quiet tonight. There was only one person in the house, sitting quietly and going through the ninjutsu scroll unfurled across his lap. Menma's violet eyes burned the scroll in his memory. His mind kept keenly on the scroll in front of him. He had to learn this if he wanted to surpass his elder brother in strength. He let out a sigh when his mind wandered back to the blonde brother of his. No matter how much he trained or tried, his brother always seemed to be a step ahead of him. Plus, he did all of that while being his lazy old self he always was. He had taken his training seriously too, and he knew he was quite strong, but he knew if he was to go against Naruto, the blonde would beat him to the ground and then some. And that thought burned him up. He admired him, but he didn't want to be always in his shadow. With a new vigor, he glared daggers at the scroll on his lap. This was why he had refused to go along with his mother and sister to the gathering of clans at the Inuzuka clan compounds. As soon as he had heard that Naruto wasn't going, and was instead going to his master for extra training, he had done the same in hopes to catch up to him. He wasn't going to let the distance be increased between them anymore. His eyes glanced to the glass door in the living room that led to their open grounds when he thought he saw something whiz past there. His eyes lingered on over the door for a moment longer before he shrugged it off as the wind blowing past and started reading his scroll again. Once more he saw something whiz past the kitchen window, and this time he narrowed his eyes there. He turned around in the blink of an eye, back towards the glass door, when his ears picked up another whiz. He walked to the glass door and stepped out, his eyes darting around nervously. His gut feeling was telling him something was wrong. He stepped in the middle of the training grounds and looked around the clearing in between the trees. The silence in the compounds was now impalpable. He knew in his heart that he was surrounded and in trouble. He flicked out a kunai and darted his eyes around sharply, trying to take in as much detail as could, given the low amounts of light in the moonlight-covered field. I know you're here, no point in playing hide and seek. You cowards better show yourselves. He shouted loudly. He looked around to see if his taunt had worked, and sure enough in a second 4 flickers were seen in front of him. Menma stiffened and dropped into a guarded stance, seeing the 4 people that were standing in front of him. All of them were wearing black cloaks. But what made his heart skip a beat were their masks. Blank masks with strange designs like he hadn't seen ever before, with the leaf Anbu symbols over them. He eyed the 4 warily. The middle one was a kunoichi, judging from her brown long hair and her bodily features. He grew especially nervous when he saw the behemoth of a man by her side. He was almost 7 feet, with a huge muscular build for crying out loud. The rest 2 weren't so intimidating, but seeing they were Anbu, he was pretty sure they were quite formidable too. The kunoichi, their squad's leader as he suspected, stepped forward a step in front of her team. Menma Uzumaki, we request you to come with us peacefully, she said in a monotone voice, making him stiffen. He was pretty sure they weren't Leaf Anbu, because they sure as hell didn't hold themselves like these machine-like drones. And why would I do that? He asked, running numbers trough his head. He was cornered. They were 4 Anbu, prepared and ready to capture him, while he was all alone. Even with all his skills, he was sure he wasn't going to be able to hold off all of them at the same time. There was a reason they were called elites after all. The odds were completely against him at the moment. Our master wishes to see you. Please escort us peacefully, she said in her same blank voice, and he gripped his kunai tightly, bringing it up to his face. And if I don't? He asked nervously, though already knew the answer. The kunoichi stared at him silently, before glancing at her teammates and nodding curtly while looking back at him. Then we are to bring you in by any means necessary, she said in her drone-like voice, throwing aside her cloak to reveal her slim and feminine body, covered by the standard Anbu uniform used by others in the village. He did note the lack of the Anbu marks on their arms though. He looked at the others. The brute swung off a huge blade, almost as big as Menma himself, from his back. The third one took out 2 blades and attached them to his forearms, and the woman herself flicked out a simple tanto. He gulped nervously when the tension around the clearing became thick, which the kunoichi broke in her monotone voice. Do not wound him fatally, master wishes to see him alive and well, she barked out compellingly, making the 3 others nod in unison. Menma took a step back and brought his kunai up to block the deadly metal stars that were being aimed at him. He blocked them quickly and jumped to the side, failing to avoid the slight gash the Anbu with the strange forearm swords made. He couldn't believe how quick they were. At this rate he would be hard-pressed to defend himself, let alone go on the offensive. He ducked down the large swipe from the blunt-edged blade, being swung over him by the brute. He crossed his arms in front of him when the kunoichi and their team launched a kick to his face, but was launched back harshly from the pure strength behind it. His back met the tree's bark roughly, and he coughed out wheezingly from the impact. The redhead opened his eyes and focused his dimming vision back to life. He glared at the 4 standing there calmly and readying their blades for the next bout. His hand wiped the dirt off his face, and he stood up with a deep breath. Alright, that does it. Kaya-san Andreas said T only use it if I was in a life or death battle. I guess fighting 4 Anbu by myself can be considered that, he thought and smirked. His eyes closed on themselves when a light yellow sheen broke out around him. The Anbu stiffened when they felt his rising chakra levels, and they all surmised instantly what was going on. He was drawing on his extra reserves now. Menma brought his hands up and clasped them in a snake seal. Ah! He roared and raised his chakra a little more to activate his ability. The yellow sheen around him covered him completely, and added a little glow to his whole body. His unruly crimson hair flailed around when his eyes turned into slits. Would flow spears. he exclaimed and pushed his palms forward. Wooden spears shot out of his sleeves and made their way straight to the four Anbus, who stiffened slightly. Each of them brought their blades forwards and blocked them efficiently. Menma pushed some more chakra and launched even more deadly spears at them in rapid fire. His eyes widened when he saw them cleave through his jutsu like it was nothing. "The boy is making too much ruckus, let's put him down," the lead kunoichi barked out to the brute, who nodded in agreement. Menma noted the four weren't trying to use jutsu at all, most probably to attract as less attention as possible. So this is how Anbu fight. He couldn't help but admire their pure skill and held his snake seal with shaking hands from the force he was exerting. The brute made a beeline for the red head. Menma saw him jump up and pull his sword back, hiding the blade and making it a deadly jackhammer in the process. He knew the only jutsu that had a chance of blocking it was the one he was still working on currently and was reading a moment ago. He pumped up his chakra and glared at the incoming attack defiantly. He wasn't going down without a fight. "Wood style, wood locking wall," he exclaimed, and thin pillars of wood broke from his feet and started clasping together in a makeshift wall. Menma grimaced at seeing the results. It was supposed to be a perfect shield, but his was just a wooden thing right now. The blunted edge of them made contact with his shield and impacted with a huge bang. Menma was blown back when his jackhammer-like blade made contact with the ground, and the shock wave alone threw him back like a rag doll. His blurry eyes focused into his front only to see the Anbu with the forearm-like blades rushing to him, most probably to knock him out, and a volley of shurikens incoming from his other side to knock him out. He knew he was done. There was no way he could possibly stop both of them, and closed his eyes in defeat. The Anbu knew it too. Clang. 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 Slash. Clang. The voices rang throughout the clearing. Menma's eyes snapped open to see the back of his brother standing in front of him on the hilt of his sword, his arms crossed and his silky blonde hair flowing slowly in the wind. He glanced down to see the tip of his blade. Having embedded the shurikens right through their holes and into the ground, they stopped their spinning a moment later. He heard a slight grunt and saw past his brother only to see the Anbu with the strange forearm blades, clutching his left shoulder, that now had a deep gash on his right bicep and was bleeding profusely. He saw the four jump back and regroup at seeing this new development, and turned his eyes to his brother, who jumped down and pulled out his sword from the ground, holding it to his side, making the blade shine slightly in the moonlight, making him quite an intimidating sight to behold. "Show off," he muttered in annoyance with a pained gasp, feeling his swollen waist, and stood up shakily. Naruto smirked hearing his brother's first words and was glad he was all right and fit enough for his snide remarks too. "I leave you just for a couple of hours and you bring four unknown Anbu to fight in the house." His lazy voice drawled out, making Menma's eye twitch at his words. He stood up fully and took his brother's side while flicking out a kunai. "I didn't call them, these creeps attacked me first, saying some creep they call their master wanted to meet me," he said angrily, and saw his brother, not retorting with any of his usually playful and lazy responses. "I see," Naruto said in such a serious voice, it made Menma glance at his brother curiously. He saw his brother's eyes not shining with their usually mischievous and happy glint, instead were deadly serious and icy as glaciers. It almost made him shiver at the confidence he was holding in front of such strong opponents. Naruto glanced around the battlefield and saw several wooden shards all around the grounds. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. "You used Makuton?" he asked seriously, and got a simple nod from his brother. Any other day, Naruto would have chewed him out for revealing it to an enemy, but when he saw his brother's condition and his opponent's conditions, even after using his abilities, he couldn't blame him. Naruto knew that if his brother hadn't even made a scratch on these masked men, even while going all out, they were the real deal and not some wannabes wearing masks and Anbu armors. His mind had started calculating all the possibilities and strategies in his mind. He was on his home turf and knew the grounds like the back of his hand. That was advantage number one. His brother's condition was a disadvantage, but their opponents had an injured member, 2 and Menma's wound weren't grave, so he could still fight. That was a plus in his mind too. They had only a limited amount of time if Naruto could, and he would alert the Anbu nearby them as soon as he had the chance. His mind was brought back to the opponents when their lead kunoichi spoke up. Naruto Namikaze. She said monotonously and Naruto said nothing. His mind was still thinking of the many strategies he could pull off and how to go about fighting them. What do you want? He asked to buy himself some time, and saw the four stand silently for a moment before she spoke up. Our master wishes to meet your little brother. We are to take him there by any means necessary. Please do not interfere, for our master regards you highly, and would not be pleased if you were injured gravely in our fight. She said monotonously, and Naruto stood silently. Her tone, their way of machine-like precision and postures. He had an inkling of an idea of who this master was. And if he was right, then this wasn't going to be pretty. Tell Danzo, my brother doesn't want to meet him, and Naruto Namikaze sends his regards through his lackeys. He said coldly, and saw the brute behind her stiffen slightly as soon as he mentioned that cripple's name. Menma wanted to know how his brother knew this Danzo, but that was a talk for another time, he reminded himself. Bingo. Naruto thought inwardly, while the kunoichi was now regarding him seriously. The boy wasn't like his brother, and was eyeing them like a hawk eyed its prey. Moreover, there wasn't an ounce of fear in his azure eyes. A calm opponent was a deadly opponent. This was taught to all root Anbus, and she was now taking him a bit more seriously than his brother. I request you to stand down, and let this go peacefully. We have not been ordered to harm your brother, just to escort him peacefully. Her voice rang out for a final ultimatum, which the blonde ignored with a smirk. The plan was now set in his mind. Menma, you take the two on the right, leave the lead kunoichi and brute to me. He whispered to him and raised his sword in front of him, dropping in his stance. Menma wanted to argue about him taking on their strongest all on his own, but now wasn't the time. He himself was injured and his brother was strong enough to take care of himself. Plus, his mind at strategies on the fly was unparalleled. He was the only one he could trust his back to right now. Alright, leave those two to me, was all he could say before Naruto was off in a blur. He slashed and met his blade with the kunoichis, and both jumped up as the huge blade passed under them, courtesy of the brute. Menma jumped forward and launched a kick to the injured Anbu's arm, who blocked and grimaced, jumping back. He threw a kunai at the fourth Anbu and made him jump back as both the brothers divided them up to their liking. The kunoichi leader was glaring daggers at Naruto from underneath her mask. Everything was going perfectly until he had come into the fight and turned it around completely. She saw what he was doing, divide and conquer. The oldest and most effective strategy to date. But it wouldn't work on them, since it gave her the perfect situation she needed right now. She and her partner would take out the Naruto, while his brother held off her other partners, and then go to capture his weakened and exhausted brother like they wanted to. It was the perfect plan in her mind. Naruto's Sharingan blazed to life unknown to the two of them. He could predict what that kunoichi was thinking, and it was right of her to think that. He wasn't stupid enough to think he could take those two on head-on and win. But a shinobi's way was that of deception. And he had many advantages in his favor right now. The pieces were set, and now it was time to start the game. He watched the kunoichi crouch a little and flick out a volley of shurikens at him. He brought his sword forward, his Sharingan enabling him to predict each and every one of their paths. His blade met each star with deadly precision, always at the last moment, and jumped up when he heard a whiz from behind him. The large blade passed underneath him harmlessly, and his eyes widened as he twisted in mid-air suddenly. His Sharingan narrowed in on the thin chakra-laced wire that was aimed to cleave his neck off right now. The kunoichi was shocked that he had seen her invisible wire attack and launched a kick to the blonde's chest. Naruto could only bring his blade forward to block in mid-air, and was launched back harshly. He twisted himself mid-air with the agility akin of a cat. His feet made contact with the brute's large chest when he let out a smirk. He pumped a burst of chakra to his feet and the brute was thrown back from the sudden contact. Naruto jumped forward and brought his blade down at the female Anbu, who blocked it and held him at a stalemate. She broke off their encounter with a wild slash, which Naruto backflipped efficiently and stood in front of her with a smirk. The Anbu knew something was up seeing his smirk and was on her guard. His right hand blurred through 6 single-handed seals, shocking her to the core. Single-handed seals. Genin don't have the required chakra control for that. She thought in shock and watched him breathe in a deep breath. Fire style, Grand Fireball Jutsu. He exclaimed and launched a humongous fireball at the shocked kunoichi. The brute jumped in front of her and brought his large blade forward as a shield. The jutsu impacted with his blade and created a huge blast, launching the two back from the shock wave it created. Naruto though smirked happily at the outcome. He loved it when a plan came together. That should wake up the neighbors. He thought with a smirk and wasn't surprised when he saw the two mostly unharmed Anbu in front of him. The brute's blade glowed a little with the heat it had endured and his arms were burnt from the intense heat he had just blocked, rendering them almost inept for battle. The female lead Anbu knew now she had to take the boy seriously. She didn't want to kill him for fear of angering her master, but he was too big of a threat with his extraordinary skills to be left alive or to be taken lightly in this battle for that matter. With Menma swiped his kunai at the Anbu, putting in all his strength and the Anbu grimaced when he blocked the blow with his injured arm. He jumped back to gain a little distance when he saw his partner regrouping with him and tried to heal him a little. "Your brother will be killed unless you surrender," the injured Anbu said, and Menma couldn't help but snort. The Anbu, however, ignored his response and continued. "He is fighting the most skilled and feared kunoichi in our ranks, head-on. She specializes in silent assassinations and infiltration tactics. You should surrender and his life might be spared." He reasoned with the redhead, who now grew a little nervous hearing that. As much as was loath to admit it, maybe Naruto might. His thoughts trailed off when the three of them turned and saw the huge blast rack, their clearing. Menma let out a cocky smirk and pulled out another kunai to go at it again when he saw his brother standing there confidently and relatively unharmed. "You should worry about your own leader. My brother is quite exceptional himself. There is a reason I look up to him after all," he said in determination and launched forward to keep up with the plan. With Naruto saw the brute go aside with a limp and knew he was out for the count and was only standing there for standby support. He narrowed his eyes at the kunoichi, who was now holding her sword single-handedly and taking out shurikens with the other. "Prepare to die," she said coldly and launched the 3 shurikens at him. Naruto was about to sidestep when he narrowed his eyes and his tami spun wildly to slow down his perception drastically. He realized what she was trying to do and stood his ground. He brought his sword up and sidestepped the stars at the last possible second, launching forward towards the kunoichi who jumped back and took onto a branch of a tree throwing some more shurikens. Again his Sharingan picked up the slight difference in normal shurikens and these ones and sidestepped them at the last possible moment and tried to attack her. She met his blade this time and both engaged in a spar of pure kenjutsu. Naruto jumped back when she tried to overpower him with her experienced style of swords and narrowed his eyes when he saw her launch even more shurikens at him. This time though, they were simple shurikens he noted and twisted his body in mid-air to dodge them and saw the final 3 he won't be able to dodge. His Sharingan saw them in slow motion, right until the last moment when their holes converged themselves, and he threw his sword right in their middle. "This is the power of the Sharingan," he thought, smirking inwardly at how much it was now integrated with each and every one of his battle styles. The sword's blade took the shurikens with it, pinning them to the ground right through their holes, halting them to a spinning stop, and he fell on top of the hilt of his sword, crossing his arms with a smirk. "Is that all you've got?" he asked in taunt, and noticed he was now in the middle of a small clearing of trees. The kunoichi smirked and jumped in front of him. "You are skilled indeed, Naruto-san, but this is the end of the line," she said blankly, and flicked her fingers slightly, making the ninja wires covering him from everywhere like a web of a spider shine into view purposefully. His eyes widened in shock, making the kunoichi smirk slightly behind her mask. She brought up her sword to a shining wire and applied pressure to it. "You were trapped from the moment I first attacked you," she explained blankly, and cut the wire to activate her trap. She smirked when one by one they all started tripping and closing in on the shocked blonde. A moment later she felt her wrist being pulled and glanced down to see her own wires tangling her. What the minus she couldn't finish when all the trapping wires trapped her limbs and neck tightly in a trap that she had set for the blonde. She glared at the blonde, and let out a loud shriek when the wire around her neck drew blood slowly and stood as still as possible. Checkmate. And that is how you play the game. Naruto thought happily when his plan started coming through to their final stages now. It was a good trap indeed, Kunoichi-san. Naruto commented with an appreciative tone and jumped down from the hilt of his sword, pulling it out, sheathing it completely in a slick motion. How? She grunted in pain as with each movement, the wires tightened themselves and were about to cleave her in many parts of her body. "I saw the wires you attached to the shuriken the moment you threw them. With each throw of your wired shurikens that I dodged, I deflected them ever so slightly with my blade, to my own liking. You were never trapping me, it was always the other way around," he explained, making the kunoichi stunned to the core. "Impossible, no one can see my wires, they are too thin for normal humans to see." She grunted in pain, and tried to buy some time for her partner to come. "I have sharp eyes is all I can say. Plus, shuriken jutsu is my specialty. You picked the worst possible opponent for yourself," he said with a smirk when he saw the wires painfully tighten, and he turned around, not wishing to see the bloodbath it would cause in a moment. She was cursing him to hell inwardly, and was wondering where the hell her partner really was. She heard a loud bang and glanced to the side to see an explosion rock near the lake. "Ah!" She heard her partner scream and grew confused. Who the hell was he fighting? "Well, my exploding clones and Akira took care of your partner quite nicely. So I guess this is it," he said once more, shocking her completely. He had this all planned from the start. "We were never even close," she thought incredulously and with a bit of admiration for him. At least she had fallen to a worthy opponent. "Never underestimate an opponent," he said lazily, left the rest hanging, putting his hands in his pockets when the kunoichi spoke up. "Especially when you ambush an opponent on his home grounds. For that is what the Shinobi Rule 39 states." She completed stoically, and Naruto started walking away slowly, his hair shadowing his eyes in sadness and regret at what was about to ensue in a moment. She closed her eyes in defeat and accepted her final moments. Squelch. Naruto grimaced and closed his eyes, not turning around, and jumped on a branch to go and see his brother who was still fighting them. He reminded himself, a shinobi never shows emotions on a battlefield, and jumped away, masking his emotions completely. With Menma, he jumped down in the clearing and saw his brother impale the already injured Anbu with another wooden spear in his other arm. The other Anbu, who was most probably their healing and support, ninja, stood by his side. Naruto and the fourth Anbu's senses tingled at the same time. Many heavy chakra signatures were narrowing in on them, and both of them knew who it was. Anbu. Both of them thought in unison. The two Anbu glared at the two brothers and stood silently for a few moments in a stare-off. Naruto Namikaze. The uninjured Anbu spoke up when he realized his team members who were fighting him couldn't be sensed anymore. Naruto rose an eyebrow when he saw the drone speaking. "We will keep an eye on you from the shadows. You are hiding much more than meets the eye," he said emotionlessly, and disappeared along with his partner in a smokeless shunshin. A moment later, they were surrounded by several teams of Anbus from all sides. The one bearing a bear mask stood forward. "What happened over here?" he asked in a commanding voice, and Menma grunted and rubbed his swollen arm. He glanced to the side to see Naruto have some slashes all over his body, most probably that came in between his own skirmishes. "We were ambushed. 4 masked men came to capture me," the redhead explained, getting a nod from Bear. Can you tell us something more about them? He asked, and Menma shrugged, too tired and injured to really care right now. Naruto too had the same thoughts, and just wanted to sleep right now. But this was important information he had to provide. Well, they were Root Anbu and were sent by Danzo himself. He said lazily, making them all stiffen and stare at the blonde incredulously. That complicated things, Bear thought and walked up to Naruto. Naruto Namikaze, you are coming with us. He said, and Naruto and Menma were about to protest when he clasped Naruto's shoulder harshly. Or, take all the evidences from the battlefield and report them to Hokage-sama. I shall take Namikaze-san in for further questioning. He said in an order and disappeared along with the blonde. Menma rushed to the spot his brother was a moment earlier. He turned his eyes around to the others who were now jumping out and taking evidences from the clearings. Where the did you take my brother? He screamed harshly to Boar, who said nothing and went about his work. Though they all stopped when they heard a shout from behind them. Menma was all he heard when he turned around and was pulled into a bone-crushing hug. He flailed his arms around wildly, gasping for air while Kushina was holding him in a death grip. She broke the hug, making the boy sigh in relief when she cupped his cheeks and started kissing him all over it. He tried to pry off his hysterical mother off, but to no avail. What happened here? She asked him with teary eyes, seeing his condition and how their grounds looked like they were a battlefield. Ka-san, 4 Anbu came to capture me and take me with them. I almost lost to them when Naruto was all he could say when he heard Kushina gasp, and her eyes roamed all around. Where is he? She asked him with a bitten lip in nervousness. He turned his furious eyes to Boar, who was now sweating bullets behind his mask. Kushina saw his gaze and narrowed her eyes on the Anbu, increasing his nervousness tenfold. These bastards took him with them. Some Anbu with a bear mask said they needed to question him. We tried to stop them but he couldn't finish because Kushina had struck out a chakra chain and pulled the Anbu to her, face to face. She was too angry right now to scold the boy for his bad language. Where the hell is my baby? She asked in a deadly quiet voice, making him gulp nervously. He would currently be in Anbu HQ for questioning. He trailed off when he saw her hair flail around in 9 tails. Her murderous violet orbs glared at him as if she was the Shinigami herself. On what grounds? You had better have a good reason for taking in the heir to a clan in for questioning, without even consulting his clan head or guardians first. She spoke coldly, making him gulp again. Yuck Kushina-sama, he said something about Root. He stuttered in fright, making Kushina's eyes narrow in on him dangerously. Danzo, why am I not surprised? So that is the bastard who has attacked my boys. She thought, and glared at the man. Another Anbu jumped down by their side and spoke up nervously, seeing the situation. Boar, there are 2 mangled corpses in the fields. Most probably Root, since their bodies have activated their curse seals. He said dutifully, making Kushina's eyes widen in horror. The second Anbu yelped, and was yanked in a chakra chain himself, while her worried eyes turned to Menma, who was looking at the ground guiltily. Naruto did it, he whispered sadly, making her clench her eyes in agony. Her boy had made his first kill, and instead of having her there to talk to her, he was being questioned in Anbu HQ. Her eyes turned to the 2 shivering Anbu and glared at them. Let's go and meet the Hokage, she said coldly, and turned to Menma, who smiled a little and nodded, already knowing what she was about to say. He went inside and she disappeared in a swirl of water, along with the 2 Anbus. Chapter 18. Anbu HQ Holding Cells. The Anbu headquarters, one of the most secure and hidden holding facilities. Accessible only to the tier of the village, truly held up to their reputations and names. Armed with the security of the village's elite, the Anbu Black Ops themselves, it was the go-to place for some of the most high-class criminals that the Leaf had in its captivity. However, the presence of a 14-year-old genin in the holding facility wasn't an everyday occurrence in here. Come on now, get in, boy. An Anbu wearing the bear mask over his face pushed the blonde in harshly and closed the bars behind him with a slam. Bastard. Naruto couldn't help but mutter. The Anbu though heard it loud and clear, and clenched his fists in anger. "What did you say?" he hissed, and Naruto turned to him, annoyance and irritation written clear across his face. He was tired, bruised, beaten and exhausted. That wasn't to say that he had just made his first kill, so it wasn't a surprise that one of the most calm and lazy personalities in the village was a bit snappy at the moment. "You heard me, big guy, you want to make something of it?" Naruto taunted him in a proud voice and confident voice. He would usually just rather ignore all these snide remarks, but after going through what he had just now, he wasn't in the mood to play goody-goody with Bear right now. The Anbu captain in question bristled in unrestrained fury, even the several Anbu patrolling the hallways were snickering at his expense. It wasn't every day that an Anbu captain was talked to this way by a newly minted genin. "Why you minus," he growled, clenching the bars, and Naruto stood his ground with an icy glare. All the present Anbu were surprised at how the boy seemed to be holding his own and not in the least bit afraid of disrespecting the blonde. "Thank Kami that you're behind those bars, just bearing your father's name doesn't make the hot shot you tend to be," he retorted back furiously, and Naruto's eyes turned murderous. He took steps towards the bar and stood face to face with the bear-shaped Anbu mask, his Sharingan blazing to life, unknown to all but him as soon as a taunt to his father was made. All the guards were surprised when they felt killing intent that matched the one Bear was leaking coming off from the blonde. "Why don't you open these bars then? I'll show you how big of a hot shot I really am. What do you say, big guy?" he snarled back, and the whole hallway felt the thick tension rising between the two each passing moment. Bear couldn't believe how a rookie genin was even standing, let alone talking back to him and making a fool out of him, while he was leaking his own killing intent. "Alright, that's enough. Break it off." A voice boomed from the side, making the two turn their glances to the source of said voice. Naruto saw a large man wearing a leather trench coat and several scars adorned over his face. His head was covered with a large bandana, while Naruto's Sharingan picked up on his movement muscles and his chakra reserves that were suppressed and controlled. He was an elite jounin for sure, no doubt about it, he surmised, and looked back to see Bear turning back and looking on to the new man face to face. "What have you brought him here for, Bear?" the large man asked, and Bear nodded. His anger lay forgotten and his duty senses kicked in. "Sir, this boy has apparently fought some rogue Anbus and claims that they belonged to the disbanded Root organization," he said dutifully, making the superior man's eyes widen momentarily. Root was a well-kept secret even when it was still being functioned, so a newly minted genin proclaiming to have knowledge of such village secrets was a surprise in itself. But he couldn't decipher the complete situation based on half-arsed information. His black eyes turned to the blonde boy, who was looking at him with narrowed and calculative eyes that a child his age shouldn't possess. He hadn't felt such eyes other than when his superiors scrutinized him for something. And that really was a rare occurrence, mind you. "Bring him into the interrogation room and call my apprentice too. We'll talk there," he commanded, and Bear nodded, smirking behind his mask when he turned to the blonde, who was glaring daggers at the large man's back. Bear opened the cell and pulled the blonde harshly, who was struggled to walk through his violent pushes. Bear couldn't care less, as this was the chance of a lifetime to get some fun with the boy. Naruto walked through the well-lit hallway slowly, with slight stumbles from those pushes every now and then. All around the building were simple hallways having white walls and simple prison cells, along with several sealed rooms. His Sharingan was still activated, unknown to everyone, while he was etching each and every little detail about the secured wing, burning it all in with his photographic memory granted to him by his eyes. That was one thing Tobirama had drilled into his head over the years: no matter the situation you're in, no matter the place you're in, always scour whatever information you could. For it could be crucial at some point in the future when you least expect it to be. Bear stopped in front of a steel door and opened it. Naruto stumbled and fell down when Bear gave him a violent push in, along with tripping his feet to go along with it completely. Naruto glared at the Anbu that he hated with all his being at that moment and looked around the dank room. It was a dark room, a single bulb hanging from the room, the lone source of light in there at the moment. All the walls seemed to be made out of pure concrete and there were 2 wooden chairs, along with a simple table in the middle. The only objects in the dank room. It would have been quite intimidating for Naruto, had he not been expecting this same thing beforehand. After all, this was the classic interrogation room in almost all stories and movies he had seen over the years. How original. He muttered to himself dryly and stood up, his hands still in metal handcuffs. He made his way to a chair and plopped down over it with a tired sigh. So this is what I get for fighting rogue Anbu who were after my life, and getting rid of them. Well, they sure are scoring points on the guest treatment department. He thought bitterly with a scowl on his usually happy face. His mood was worsening over here by the minute. And to top it off, these bastards were doing the very thing he despised with his very being. Ordering him around, pushing him into a corner, as if he was their possession. That was one thing he despised with his very being. He was a free boy who loved freedom in everything he did, and this wasn't on one of his favorite lists. His thoughts were broken off when the door opened, making him squint his eyes from the new bright light before it was closed and 2 people walked in. The large man from before took a seat in front of him, slamming a tape recorder on the table and a clipboard kept at his friend's hands. Behind him was a woman, no doubt the apprentice he was talking about from earlier. Well, let's get this thing started, he said in a professional manner, making Naruto's eyes turn to him, though he remained silent and calm. Flushing his anger out of his system, he remembered all the things Tobirama had taught him about being in an enemy territory and being interrogated for information you didn't want to give. And right now he wasn't going to give these creeps any information whatsoever until he had talked it out with the old man. Now he thanked his old man inwardly for the lesson he had once seen as dank and boring, but had been forced to learn by his master and by proxy, which was now going to come in handy. He had his pride on the line here with how they were treating him, and he would be damned if he let it go on any further. Name? He asked professionally to start in a casual manner, since he wasn't an enemy, shinobi or anything, and Naruto stared at him blankly, making him feel quite stupid from that stare. Even the woman was staring at him blankly and he coughed in his hand, feeling a bit embarrassed now. Look at his protocol, so we have to follow it, he said stoically, trying to keep his dignity intact, and Naruto still remained silent. The large man couldn't help but praise the boy inwardly at the completely blank and emotionless expression he was holding at the moment. Even he could not read what was going on through his head currently. It is usually polite to give your own introduction first before asking for someone else's, at least that was what I was taught growing up, not so sure about you though, Naruto remarked dryly, making the man's eye narrow in on him. He was definitely Kakashi's student all right. Both could annoy him with these dry and aloof remarks anytime. He glared to the side when he heard the slight giggles coming from his apprentice with a look that said, "You're not helping me any." He turned back to the boy to see his firm eyes that didn't seem to budge from his intense stare. The boy's good, he thought, and nodded after a moment. But he still needed to get this over with as soon as possible. Very well, I'm Ibiki Marino, the head of Anbu's torture and interrogation unit. My friend here is Anko Mitarashi, my second in command and personal apprentice, he said, pointing to his right, and Naruto glanced at the exotically dressed Kunoichi for a moment, only to shiver inwardly at her sadistic smile and got a wave in return. Yo! She chirped happily, making Naruto sweat drop at the happy girl. Was she really an interrogator? But he knew better than to make assumptions on looks and first impressions alone. Naruto Namikaze, he said simply, and the 2 looked at him curiously but became embarrassed when they realized he was done, and looked at each other before turning back to him. Alright, Naruto-san. So to get started, what was the level of the opponents you faced tonight? He asked, and couldn't help but think what the boy was thinking right now. His face wasn't giving anything away, and that was saying something, since he had cracked a lot of hard nuts with his intense stares alone that had seemingly no effect on this rookie genin. All 3 were silent for a few moments, with the adults thinking he was taking time to mull over their question. However, the answer they got wasn't what they were expecting. I'm not obliged to answer your question, he replied simply, making the two adults blink. They stared at him incredulously and blinked again. Excuse me. I think I didn't quite get you, Ibiki said in disbelief, making Naruto nod slowly. Then I repeat, I'm not obliged to answer your question, he said simply yet again, and this time Ibiki's eyes narrowed in on him. There weren't many people who would like to play hardball with him. And why is that? He asked calmly, but was a little perturbed by the blonde on his inside. He couldn't, for the life of him, predict what he was going to say next. Do next. He cursed that scarecrow of a sensei of his. He was rubbing off on him in all the wrong ways. A few more months, and the boy would be wearing a face mask while reading his precious gold all the time. But he looked up when the blonde in the questioning seat spoke up. Because this interrogation is based on ground so loose, I'm sure Lord Hokage will have a field day with you all. And if he doesn't, my mother and old man surely will. He answered him calmly, without a hint of emotion in his voice. Ibiki leaned forward with a raised eyebrow, putting his chin over his hands. Now this was one answer no one had given him before. And this was a pretty new way of landing a threat over him of all people. Oh. And how is that, if I may ask? He asked dryly, disbelief and amusement etched completely in his voice. Naruto's eyes turned icy, surprising the two at his intense stare he was giving them right now. As Konohagakure no Sato's charter, laid down by the mutual agreement of the Shai Hokage and the Daio himself, says in Article 21b Section 100 Subsection A. The rules for interrogating a prisoner who isn't accused of anything that has been done against the village, or might harm the village in any ways, can only be interrogated within the presence of the Hokage himself, or through his direct orders that are first shown to the appointed victim unless arrested in by the village, and only if when he is accused on grounds of treason with viable evidences in their midst. And I for one, am on the first stance that I haven't done anything tonight that can be considered grounds for treason. As such, this whole interrogation is seemingly useless and completely illegal, he answered calmly. Complete and utter silence reigned in on the floors of the interrogation cell. Even a pin drop could have been heard in the room, had there been a pin actually dropped. Ibiki was staring at him wide-eyed. He for one didn't know how to respond or say anything to the blonde, who had just stated a small paragraph from the 1,000-page charter of the village's founding laws as if it was a recital poem. Anko, though, was stupefied at his words. Never before had she heard a boy, his age she might add, recite a village law word to word, and she was quite sure she didn't even remember what the village charter actually was. He broke out of his stupor when Anko let out a wolfish whistle towards the blonde and giggled happily. Now that was something to make my man Ibiki go silent in an interrogation. I like the little gaki, she said in giggles, and got a death glare from her accomplice for her words. That once more weren't helping the tense situation any. He turned back to the blonde and smirked inwardly. The blonde really was something else, for never before had someone pulled that card on him, and his words had grounds of heavy consideration too. But not this time. He held his hand out to Anko, who stared at him blankly. He broke off from his stare-off with the blonde and looked at Anko's innocent expression, making his eyes twitch in annoyance. Anko, he growled out, not in the mood for her antics right now. Ibiki, she continued innocently, not getting his point, and a tick mark appeared on his forehead. Naruto watched the two in complete amusement, from the sidelines. Now this he had to see for himself. The papers for permission of interrogation signed by Lord Hokage himself, if you would please. He continued patiently, though his patience were running quite thin right about now. What papers? Anko asked in pure innocence, making him look at her incredulously. She had done this with him 1,000 times with him, right? The papers that Bear must have handed to you for the holding and interrogation on one Naruto Namikaze, he answered, barely holding his thin patience online. And all he got was an innocent stare with a pout from his apprentice. That idiot didn't give me nothing, Ibiki. I thought he handed those to you. After all, you called for me here, remember? She asked him with a pointed finger, making him look at her incredulously. He hadn't gotten any orders to, for that matter, none officially signed by the Hokage. There aren't any official orders, because no one got them or was issued any. The ever-calm voice of Naruto rang in the room, making Ibiki look at him incredulously. Though Naruto continued on, undeterred of the man's stare. Bear, as you called him, picked me up straight from my house as soon as I mentioned the word root to that idiot. As such, there are no official orders, and my words from earlier stand true. He finished calmly, and Ibiki rubbed his forehead and pinched his nose with a sigh. This was utterly humiliating and embarrassing for the entire Black Ops unit. No doubt Kushina would raise hell over kidnapping a clan heir from his home grounds, done by them no less in the council, and she had clear grounds to do so. And the Hokage would be out for next to handle the perpetrators in question. He would be in that list too, since his trust in his accomplices had led to this situation getting this far out of control. Why the hell would that idiot bear Anbu? He growled to himself, but was surprised when an answer came from in front of him. Probably to take out his grudge on me. I'm not the most liked around person in the village, you know. He said pointedly, making Ibiki slap his forehead in exasperation. That damned idiot was so damn unprofessional. He was personally going to see through his suspension now. Click. Naruto looked up surprised and rubbed his now freed wrists to turn his eyes to the softly smiling Kunoichi, who ruffled his hair playfully. Not everyone thinks of you that way, Gaki. Count me in one of those, K. She asked him with her usual grin, and Naruto couldn't help but smile at the eccentric Kunoichi. Arigato Mitarashi-san. He said politely, making her grin sadistically before she was wrapped up all over him and rubbing his cheek with hers. Naruto turned beet red at the completely pressed Kunoichi now resting on his lap and so close to him, barely holding on to his pride and dignity right now. What's with the formalities, Gaki? Don't you like your sexy friend Anko-chan, eh? She purred sexily in his ear, and Naruto sweat dropped at her bipolar nature, feeling quite uncomfortable now with the two large mounds pressed seductively on his chest. Ibiki decided to stop her before she went out of control, and he wouldn't be able to save the boy from her when she got going. Anko, stop your antics now, he is a kid. Do you want to be considered a pedophile? I for one don't think so. Asked Ibiki dryly, making her pout childishly before she licked Naruto's cheek sexily, involuntarily making the blonde shiver and feel completely helpless at her erotic actions. Is this how his Heim felt when he teased her? He couldn't help but think that, but crushed his thoughts instantly when he saw her licking her lips with a bloodthirsty gaze that made his insides twist, and his mask was now on the verge of falling apart completely. No, this woman's plain old crazy. He thought instantly, and sighed in relief when she was off of him and grinning at his crimson cheeks like crazy, feeling quite proud of her skills and bodily features right now. Naruto couldn't help but look away from that utterly revealing mesh suit that she was displaying all the more heavily now by pressing her arms together near her chest to make her cleavage a lot more revealing, not like it wasn't already. What the hell was wrong with that lady? So now can I leave? He asked Ibiki, the exhaustion of his day finally catching up to him, and to get away from a grinning Anko. The man, though, as much as he wanted to say yes and be done with this mess, shook his head. I'm sorry, kid, but you have been signed into the holding cells officially. So I will have to go to Hokage-sama and get your release papers signed. You can stay in the holding cells, I'll get you one of the nicer ones and some food too. So don't worry, just let me clear out this mess. He said, and Naruto nodded with a tired sigh. This was really getting bothersome, and he just wanted to go home now. Anko, take him to his cell and get him settled in. I'll go straight to the tower and clear this up myself. She motioned a finger to him in a seductive manner and walked with a sway of her hips. Naruto looked at Ibiki blankly, giving him his sensei's patented look, who sighed tiredly. Don't worry, you'll be fine. She is just playful is all. He reasoned, but saw the boy was not really convinced when the girl in question was licking her lips and calling him to hurry it up. A bit too playful, but harmless nonetheless. He continued on, and this time Naruto nodded hesitantly, satisfied a bit by the large man's answer. He walked with Anko, who just made small talk with him, putting in her own suggestive remarks that made him flustered at her blunt words each time and got laughs from said Kunoichi. Finally, They stopped in front of a cell, which the Violet opened up for him, putting her hands on her hips. "Alright Gaki, this is your abode for now, enjoy." She chirped happily, making Naruto relieved that, at least the bed looked like it had a mattress and wasn't all steel. He looked back to see the grinning Kunoichi, who was still standing there, and shivered inwardly when she licked her lips seductively. "Or I can stay with you and show you a nice time, you know, pop your cherry and all," she said sexily, making all the blood in his body rush up to his cheeks. What? What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, completely flushed like his adorable kitten when she was teased by him, and his eye twitched when she just laughed wholeheartedly at his reactions. He was just too easy for her. He slammed the bars shut, which was quite ironical, that someone wanted to get locked up so hurriedly. But he wasn't willing to take any chances with that Kunoichi. She wasn't normal, that's for sure. "Alright Gaki, I'll send some food later on, so sleep a little, alright? It's quite late already." She waved him, walking down the hallways. He winced when he heard a crack and a man's scream, followed by Anko's laugh, who cackled no touching out loud. He had a fairly good idea of what must have happened and fell down on bed face first. Finally, "So how was your first interrogation?" A new voice trailed off in the middle of the dead silent room when the blonde yelped and fell down on the floor face first, completely shocked at the new presence, no doubt. Tobirama watched the twitching blonde on the floor with a sweat drop. Wasn't he supposed to be a censor and all? Naruto rubbed his aching nose and glared at the stoic Senju sitting on the chair as if he was in a park, sitting on a bench. "How long have you known I?" "Wait, scratch that. How long have you been observing me?" he asked him in an accusing tone, knowing the man's thinking process after observing them so closely for years. Tobirama just shrugged carelessly, and Naruto knew he won't be getting anything else out of the man now. He could be quite annoying like that when he wanted to. "So I heard you had an interesting night." Tobirama spoke, changing the subject to what he wanted to hear right now. Instantly he saw the slight changes in the boy's features, who now looked a bit downtrodden. "I killed 2 of them," he said simply, already knowing the man in front of him knew everything else. Tobirama said nothing and leaned back in his chair, his eyes gazing at the ceiling with a slight furrowing of eyebrows. "That isn't like you," he started, seeing the boy's even more solemn look. He knew something else was up. "You would avoid pointless slaughter. What really happened?" he asked in his calm voice, containing a hint of concern for the pupil he saw as his son in all ways but blood. "They attacked Menma, so I tried to stop them as best as I possibly could have, and almost succeeded," he whispered shamefully. Tobirama hung on to his every word. First kills were what made or break most shinobi careers, as they came to realize what this life was really about. "I trapped the Kunoichi leader. The girl tried to weave a shuriken jutsu trap on me, and I countered it subtly to trap her instead. I restrained that huge bulky guy with my exploding clones, and Akira too had gotten a lot of hits on him." He continued on his tale, making Tobirama nod. He wouldn't say it right now, seeing the situation, but he was proud of the way the boy had gone about executing the fight. Show as little as you can and maximize the outcome with the least possible moves. Efficiency, precision and stealth. The true marks of a shinobi. That was what he had taught him most of all, and he was proud that his student had embraced it to heart. "What happened then?" he asked calmly, and for the first time, Naruto raised his head to uncover his shadowed azure eyes, that were shimmering with tears on the verge of dropping now. The Kunoichi in the trap was trapped in such a way that each movement caused the trap to tighten itself on her to the point of being fatal, and I warned the big Anbu that if he didn't surrender, then I would blow him. He trailed off in sobs, and Tobirama now understood everything. The boy never did have a heart akin to a killer, but now he knew what had happened truly, which was what had him in a loop when he had heard of what had transpired tonight after his disciple had left his residence. The boy had engaged, trapped and given his enemies a fair chance to surrender and become captives to live another day. But they were root, their primary objective was mission success, or obliterating all traces that could lead back to their sources. Even their lives. "I didn't kill them, old man, I gave them a chance." But the kunoichi she just didn't. He sobbed hysterically, and Tobirama pulled his face in his chest, and let the boy cry it all out. It was for the better if he let it all out and didn't bottle it up. And now that he knew what had truly happened, he was even prouder of his student. The boy really did live up to each expectation he held for him and surpassed them each time. This time was no different, but this time it had led to a change. A change in him. The boy had finally grown up and become a true shinobi, now taking his first steps in the crimson paths of this dark life. I'm not a monster, old man, I'm no demon. I didn't want to kill them. I swear. He mumbled in between his wails, and Tobirama's heart clenched before he steeled his features and cupped the boy's cheeks to make him look at his eyes forcefully. The village's snide and subtle remarks had gotten to him apparently, over the years, not that it wasn't expected due to their foolishness. But he had to clear his mind up right now. I know you're no demon, Naruto, for a demon never gives a chance to its prey, and kills them without remorse. The fact you gave them one, even if they wished to die rather than take it, and still grieve for what happened makes you more human than most in the world, son. He said calmly. Naruto calmed down to soft sniffles, hearing the years of experience and wise words laced in his voice. The concern in his eyes and the confidence that he was telling the truth, plus the fact that he called him the one thing that he had longed for hearing, made him break down again and hug his father figure for dear life. Tobirama rubbed his back for a few more moments before the arms, hugging his chest, went soft, and he felt the boy, no standing up only by his support on him. He smiled and scooped the boy up in his arms, who had finally been drained enough to be completely knocked out now, and disappeared in the death of the night. Omake. Through the silent hallways of the Anbu HQ holding cells, a lone figure strolled by nonchalantly, as if it were an amusement park for him. The man's face covered with his usual face mask, and his lone eyes, showing nothing but a lazy, aloof side to the man's casual appearance. It had been some time since Kakashi had retired from the Anbu, but he was still one of its most respected and looked up to retired members. So he had a bit of say and leverage to go in as he wanted to within their confines. Some previous Anbu that were once under him even approached him for some advice rather occasionally, seeing the man's impeccable record and fame among the Black Ops. So when he had apparently heard, that is, from outside the Hokage office's window. Not that he was quite brave, courageous, and completely stupid enough to actually venture in when the Uzumaki clan head was in one of her moods. He had come to know that all that sudden deployment and convergence of Anbu patrols was due to his cute little Genin's actions tonight. And Kushina's reason for throwing her tantrum was because he had apparently been arrested by some stupid and no doubt new member of the Black Ops. He tucked his hands in his pockets, searching for the living quarter where they had put his charge in and to take him out of there. What kind of a sensei would he be if he let his cute Genin be in here any while longer when he had such a caring and loving sensei for him? That was beside the point that he was still a couple of hours late. But that was a moot point and could be neglected. After all, he would be well taken care of in the most secure prison in the village. Right. Kakashi, what the hell are you doing here? Asked an annoyed voice of one Ibiki Marino, who wasn't in one of his best moods, knowing what he would have to explain to the Hokage and then, subsequently, the council before they were scrutinized for their actions by those coots. Ah, Ibiki, just the man I wanted to see, he said in a nostalgic voice, making the man's frown deepen. He didn't like Kakashi one bit. He was quite possibly his least favorite person in the village. What do you want? He asked gruffly, making the Jounin give him his patented eye smile, much to the big man's annoyance. You see, my Genin is under some confusion, been arrested by some newbie. So I thought I should cash in a favor from all of the other ones. You owe me, remember? He asked in his aloof voice, and Ibiki's frown turned into a full-blown scowl. Ibiki Marino, head of the Anbu Torture and Interrogation Unit, probably the scariest person alive for any captive shinobi and a master deceptive, was an excellent poker player too. He had beaten everyone in the village with his stone face, and his critical eye for discerning what makes a person tick had made him a magician with the cards. He had won against all other than Kakashi, that is. It was really hard to discern what a man was thinking when 3/4 of his face was hidden in cloth and his lone visible eye was always held half-lidded, containing all the mirth and aloofness in the world. In one word, he was Ibiki's kryptonite. He hated it when the jounin beat him at the table, and gave him that annoying crinkle of an eye he called a smile, and would rather leave than cashing up on his win, saying he would keep it as a favor for later. Apparently, today he wanted to cash in on one. "Let me guess, you want to get Namikaze out, don't you?" he asked dryly, making the jounin eye smile. Ibiki's eye twitched. He had half a mind to rip his lone eye out to keep him from smiling again. He was probably the most hated person on his list, with now his student a close second. Like master, like pupil, he mused. "Alright, here are the keys. You can take him. I suppose I know Sandime won't be too keen on keeping him in anyway. We'll just report him." He left after his orders. He said tiredly, not one to put up with twisting the rules, but he couldn't say no to Kakashi. He owed the man a lot, bets or not. Kakashi nodded and went down to the cell Ibiki had told him to. How his genin would look up to him, his savior. He couldn't believe it. Maybe he might even squeeze out a favor and get a limited edition book from his godfather. Now that would be something, and the boy would most probably hug him to death for coming to his rescue. And then he would tell his teammates, who too would look up to him and worship the very ground he walked on. Oh, what a great teacher he was. Clink. Yo Naruto. See, your sensei came too. Whiz ZZ. A breeze blew in the completely sealed up room, which was quite comical if one might see, and the jounin sweat dropped at seeing the cell devoid of any life. He checked the cell number and register again, but saw he was in the right one, which meant someone had come in and done the rescuing a little earlier. A few moments later, a scarecrow jounin was crouched in the corner of the cell, drawing circles on the floor with a tear leaking down his lone eye. All his plans were ruined, and someone had cashed in on his idea an hour earlier. If only he hadn't embraced his friend's philosophies in life so to heart, then. "Obito, this time I don't like you," he whispered, sulking in his own tardiness when the cell accidentally closed with that imaginary breeze. The jounin, unaware that he was locked in until someone came and got him out, just sulked in a corner at his failure to become a star in his genin team's eyes. What a day it truly was. That's it for this story. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next story, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.